People have talked about the Black Dahlia murder for decades, and, it's one of those cases that just won't die. It's stuck in people's minds, probably because it was so gruesome, so public, and never solved. Elizabeth Short, they called her the Black Dahlia, was found cut in half, her body was drained of blood, and she had a strange smile carved onto her face. It happened in Los Angeles back in 1947. A young woman, just starting out, gone in the most horrific way. And the LAPD, for all their work, never found who did it. Not officially, anyway. But a lot of people think they did know. That's where this whole idea of a corrupt cop theory comes in. It's not just about a botched investigation, it's about something far darker. It's about the LAPD knowing exactly who the killer was, and then, for reasons we'll talk about, covering it up. Keeping it quiet, protecting someone. It sounds like something out of a movie, right? But the thing is, there are some pretty compelling arguments that make you wonder. Think about Los Angeles in the 1940s. It wasn't the cleanest place. There was a lot of corruption in city government and the police force. Money talked. Power talked. And if you had enough of both, well, maybe you could get away with things. Maybe even murder. It's a sad thought, but it's not unrealistic for that time. The LAPD had a reputation, and it wasn't always a good one. So the idea that they might protect one of their own, or someone high up in society, isn't completely out there. It fits the era. One of the biggest names connected to this theory, and the most talked about suspect, is a man named Dr. George Hodel. And this isn't just some random person. His own son, Steve Hodel, who was actually a retired LAPD homicide detective himself, spent years investigating his father. That's a powerful thing, for a son to accuse his own dad of such a horrific crime. And for a former cop to then point the finger at his old department for a cover-up. It adds a whole different layer of credibility, or at least serious questioning. Steve Hodel's journey started after his father died. He was going through his dad's old photo albums and found pictures that looked like Elizabeth Short. He also found other stuff that just didn't sit right. He started digging, and what he uncovered pointed straight to his father, Dr. Hodel, as the Black Dahlia killer. But it also pointed to a deliberate effort by the police to stop the investigation, or at least to never quite close it properly. Dr. George Hodel was a prominent physician in Los Angeles. He was well-connected, smart, and lived in a fancy house, the Soden House, also known as the Franklin House. It was a pretty unique, architecturally significant place. He hosted parties there, big, wild parties with famous people, powerful people, artists, and maybe some people who weren't so famous, but had dark secrets. The kind of place where things could happen, and maybe get swept under the rug. Steve Hodel argued that his father's house, this Franklin House, was actually where Elizabeth Short was killed and dismembered. He found old police reports that showed dogs trained to find human remains had sniffed around the property back in 1947. They even hit on a scent, but nothing concrete ever came of it publicly. It was like the police investigated and then. The LAPD did investigate George Hodel. They even wiretapped his house in 1950, 3 years after the murder. They put listening devices in his home, and they recorded things, disturbing things. They heard him talking about killing Elizabeth Short. They heard him saying, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. My father has already told me that he did kill the Black Dahlia," or something very close to that effect. And they heard other conversations that seemed to implicate him in other crimes, maybe even other murders. The wiretap transcripts, when Steve Hodel eventually got hold of them, were chillin'. They show the police were onto something big. So if the police have these recordings, these really incriminating statements from a suspect, why didn't they arrest him? Why didn't they charge him? That's the million-dollar question, and the answer for the corrupt cop theory is simple: they couldn't or wouldn't. There are several ideas about why this cover-up might have happened. One is that Dr. Hodel had powerful friends. He was part of a certain social circle. If he went down, who else might go down with him? Maybe other prominent people who attended his wild parties, who engaged in questionable activities. A scandal involving a high society doctor could open a can of worms that the LAPD and the city itself did not want opened. It could expose a whole network of corruption, illicit sex, drug use, and other unsavory stuff among the elite. The LAPD might have worried about the damage to the city's image, and their own image, if they brought down such a powerful figure and exposed his associates. Another angle is that Dr. Hodel might have had some dirt on the police themselves. Maybe he had information about corrupt officers or their associates. In a time when the LAPD was known for its internal issues, protecting a source or preventing exposure of their own wrongdoing would have been a strong motivator. It's a common trope in detective stories, but it's rooted in real-world possibilities. A powerful person who knows where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking, holds a lot of leverage. And then there's the nature of the crime itself. The Black Dahlia murder was particularly brutal and sexually charged. If a prominent doctor was found to be a sadistic killer, it would be an enormous scandal. It would make people question the safety of the city, the morals of its upper crust. Sometimes institutions prefer to quietly contain a problem, even if it means letting a killer walk free, rather than letting a full-blown public crisis erupt. It's a cynical view, but not unheard of in history. After the wiretap, the police supposedly wrapped up their investigation into Hodel. They concluded there wasn't enough evidence to charge him specifically with the Black Dahlia murder. But they had those tapes. They had his own words that seemed to confess to the crime. It doesn't make sense unless something else was going on. Steve Hodel believes his father somehow got tipped off or had an inside track and then left the country, moving to Asia, effectively escaping justice. He lived a long life abroad, never facing charges for the Black Dahlia case. The case of Dr. Hodel isn't just about Elizabeth Short either. Steve Hodel and others also link him to other unsolved murders in the area. The Red Lipstick Murder, for example, which happened around the same time and had similar gruesome elements. Some of the handwriting samples found in taunting letters sent to the police by the Black Dahlia killer were also compared to Hodel's handwriting, with some experts seeing similarities. It suggested a serial killer, and a highly intelligent, manipulative one. If the lab had caught him for the Dahlia, they might have solved other cases too. But if they were covering it up, then all those other victims also suffered from that decision. The way the initial investigation was handled in general also feeds into the cover-up theory. It was chaotic. There were many false confessions, people claiming they did it just for the attention. The press was all over it, making it even harder for the police to do their job quietly. But some argue that this chaos was also useful for a cover-up. It created so much noise and so many dead ends that the real trail could be easily obscured. If you want to hide a specific truth, sometimes you just need to flood the zone with a million other possibilities. And let's talk about the evidence itself, or the lack of it, officially. The crime scene was pretty clean in some ways. No weapon was found. The body was placed carefully. It suggested someone who knew what they were doing, someone who wasn't panicking. A doctor, perhaps, with medical knowledge of anatomy, someone used to handling bodies. This also points to Hodel, who was a physician, but if the crime scene was handled in a way that protected the killer, and the police then failed to follow up on key leads like the wiretaps, it looks suspicious. It looks like more than just incompetence. People who support the corrupt cop theory aren't just speculating wildly. They look at the gaps, the inconsistencies, and the specific actions or inactions of the police. They see a pattern, they see the resources put into the case, the massive public outcry, and then the sudden cold trail when the police were arguably very close to their man. It's not just a conspiracy theory for the sake of it. It's a theory born out of the failure of a very high-profile case and some disturbing evidence that came out much later. The argument that the lab had simply failed is also a strong one. Murder investigations in the 1940s weren't as sophisticated as they are today. Forensics were limited. DNA wasn't a thing. They relied heavily on witness testimony, confessions, and circumstantial evidence. It was also a very different Los Angeles, a sprawling city with many transient people, making it hard to track down everyone. The sheer number of false confessions alone would have taxed any police department. It's possible, very possible, they just genuinely couldn't crack the case, despite their best efforts. And maybe the wiretap evidence wasn't as conclusive as it sounded, or wasn't enough to get a conviction in court at the time. It's hard to know exactly what a jury would have accepted back then, but even with those counter-arguments, the Hodel theory and its connection to a police cover-up just won't go away. It's too compelling. The idea that justice was deliberately denied, not just by a clever killer, but by the very people sworn to uphold the law, is a hard pill to swallow. It makes people angry, it makes them distrust institutions, and it keeps the mystery of the Black Dahlia alive, not just as a murder case, but as a symbol of deeper societal corruption. Think about the context. Post-war America. Los Angeles booming, but with a dark underbelly, and Hollywood glamour mixed with vice and crime. The LAPD was facing massive challenges, and internal cleanups were often slow and resistant. It was a time when powerful men could often bend the rules, and sometimes break them entirely, with little consequence if they had the right connections. When Steve Hodel published his books, Black Dahlia Avenger and others, he brought a lot of this to light. He wasn't just some armchair detective, he was a former cop, trained in these very investigations. And he was accusing his own father, which adds a layer of tragic conviction to his work. His detailed accounts of his father's life, his connections, the evidence didn't see uncovered, and the way the police seemed to handle or mishandle the investigation made a lot of people reconsider the official narrative. And it's not just Steve Hodel. Other people have come forward over the years with stories that connect powerful figures to the Dahlia case or point to police involvement in some kind of cover-up. These accounts often get dismissed as unreliable or sensational, but when they keep popping up, especially around a central figure like Dr. Hodel, it makes you pause, or it makes you think. The enduring fascination with the Black Dahlia isn't just about the murder itself. It's about the idea that there's a secret, that the truth is out there, but it's been buried. And for many, that secret involves the very people who are supposed to find the killer. It suggests a deeper rot, a systemic problem that allowed a monster to walk free and left a young woman's brutal death unavenged. It's easy to blame the police after the fact. It's easy to create conspiracy theories when a case goes cold. But with the Black Dahlia, the reasons for suspecting a cover-up are more substantial than just a general distrust. They are tied to specific actions, like the wiretap, and specific inactions, like the failure to follow through on those incriminating recordings. They are tied to the power and influence of the main suspect. So, did the LAP know the Black Dahlia's killer and cover it up? We don't have a definitive, official answer. The case remains open in many ways, an unsolved mystery that haunts Los Angeles history. But for a lot of people, especially those who've looked closely at the evidence, the signs point to yes. They believe the police had their man, or at least a very strong suspect, and for whatever complex, dark reasons, they chose to look the other way, leaving Elizabeth short and the public without true justice. It's a sad thought, but it's a story that continues to resonate because it speaks to a very human fear that sometimes the institutions meant to protect us might also betray us, and that sometimes the truth is just too inconvenient to reveal.